Hey family, it's Tracy. I am back for blog number 3. I figured I would make this blog. I have a little bit of extra energy. I worked out for the first time since I've been sick, which surprisingly I feel pretty good afterwards. So I figured, hey, why not? Go ahead and try blog number 3 before I start feeling tired again. But the workout went well, and I'm happy, and I think I'm ready to start working out again on a regular basis. But for blog number 3, what I thought I'd do is kind of talk a little bit more about my grandparents and my great-grandmother. And if it's not too long, maybe I'll touch on my mom in this blog too. As I stated, my mom's name is or was Alice Faye Coleman, married name Smith, and her parents were Howard Coleman and Jessie Coleman, or Jessie Ford Coleman, and my grandmother Jessie's mother's name was Mae Ford. Now, my great-grandmother, Mae Ford, was really the only great-grandparent that I knew. By the time I came along, my great-grandfather had passed away. Now, Mae Ford was an interesting character in our family. Mae Ford really didn't like her great-grandkids. I think most of us felt that way when we were smaller and growing up. She really didn't take to a lot of her great-grandkids. I think there might have been one or two. I think my cousin Deborah and my niece, who would have been her great-great grandchild, Tiffany, were the ones in the family that she really took to. But as a child, I remember that Mae Ford, she lived in the house next to my grandparents, on some land in the house next to my grandparents in Whiteville, North Carolina. I heard stories about when she was younger, and she was married to my grandfather, or my great-grandfather, that she had left her family to go to New York, and she didn't come back. And for a number of years, they thought something happened to her, that she had died. And she came back many years later, and by then, her children were pretty much grown. And she reintroduced herself and got to know them again, and built a relationship with them. How accurate all that is, I can't attest to, but that was the story that was kind of told in our family about, Grandma Mae, what happened when she was younger. But what I do know about Grandma Mae firsthand was that she was a very attractive lady. She had, beautiful skin, and she had beautiful hair, and she was slender, on the slender side. And she chewed tobacco like crazy. She always had her tobacco can, and she'd spit it in there, and I just thought that was the most disgusting habit ever. But that's one thing I do remember about her. And the other thing I remember about her was she was a great cook, and her cakes were the best. You could not, oh my gosh, her cakes were, I mean, all of the women on my mom's side of the family are or were great cooks. But my great-grandmother, was awesome. Her daughters were awesome, and their daughters were awesome. But we loved Grandma Mae's cakes. That was one thing I remembered about her. I also remember that when I was younger, like I said, she seemed really mean to a lot of us, and that may not have been her. She may just have been someone who didn't really take to kids very well. But I remember that she had these trees in her backyard, and I can't remember if they were plum trees or apple trees or maybe both, but they would have some of the best fruit on them. And as kids, of course kids see that, they want some of that fruit. But she hated for you to take fruit off her trees. And even after they fell to the ground and they were rotting, she refused to let you have that fruit. And that would make us so angry because it's like, it's rotting. Why can't we have it? But that was just her. That was Grandma Mae. And now our relationship changed as I grew up and she got older. She seemed to mellow out, and maybe because we were older, she could relate to us better, the great grandkids. But I felt like by the time I was an adult and before she passed away, she died of cancer. Before she passed away, she started to get to know us on a personal level. And, you know, I actually built a decent relationship with her. Um, you know, I wish I had gotten to know her better, and probably if I could go back, I probably would have, because she was a very interesting character, and I would like to have known a lot more about what happened when she was younger and why she left and took so many years to come back to her family. So, you know, that's really all I can tell you about Great Grandma Mae Ford. Now, Granddaddy, Howard Coleman. I love Granddaddy to death. Uh, from what from my perspective on Granddaddy, and some of, you know, my other cousins may have a different perspective on it. Granddaddy was not always a talker. A lot of times when I would visit in the summer, and sometimes I would be down there by myself, he tended to be more on the quiet side. But Granddaddy was a worker. Him and Grandma Jessie were workers. And I think that's where their children got their strong work ethic from, because they were workers. They busted their butts to make sure their family had and you know, didn't go without. And they would do what they needed to do. But by the time I came along, Granddaddy had mellowed out considerably from the stories that were told to me. Um, when I was little, um, when our family would get together, well, a lot of our family, because our family was pretty big, would get together, the adults would sit out front in the yard of my grandparents' house, and they would have their talks and conversations and reminisce. And I used to like to sometimes, like, you know, they always wanted the kids to go off and play, but sometimes I would kind of linger back just to listen to some of their conversations about, you know, history and how things used to be and things like that. And one of the stories about Granddaddy, I mean, they used to talk about how much of a hellraiser he was and things like that. And every time I would hear it, all I would think about is Granddaddy, because he always seemed so mellow. He was a deacon in the church. He went to church every Sunday. He would be the treasurer for the church, and he would come, you know, bring the money home, and he would have the grandkids help him count the money, and we loved that, sitting in the kitchen and helping him count the church money and things like that. Um, and the other thing I remember about Granddaddy too was that he loved to have his head scratched, his back scratched and cleaned with alcohol. And he loved, and this is going to sound disgusting, to have what he called his nose wormed, which was basically getting rid of the dry skin on the outside of his nose. But that was something he loved, and he'd pay you a quarter or 50 cents to do, you know, scratch his head or scratch his back or wash his back for him or something like that. Um, and that was something I think we as grandkids like to do for them, because we love to see Granddaddy happy. Um, but that was just, you know, those are just a couple of the memories, that my personal memories that I remember from Granddaddy. I also remember how Grandma Jessie would purposely get him riled up over something stupid, and he'd get to going, and that's the only time you really heard him talk a lot. And his mouth would just go so fast you couldn't half understand him because he was so riled up. But like I said, that's just, you know, a few of the things I remember about Granddaddy. Um, But some of the stories they told me about Granddaddy that stick out in my head that, you know, I took with me growing up was they said, he was, like I said, he was a real hellraiser when he was younger. And he used to have this liquor still in the woods, way back in the woods in back of where they lived at. And he used to run illegal liquor. Again, and I couldn't picture Granddaddy. Like, this was a side I didn't know. But from what I was told, I guess back then, the police would try to locate these stills and things and bust the people who were running them. And back then, the police force in Whiteville was all white. And of course, I think it was probably the 40s, the late 40s when this happened. So there was a lot of prejudice and stuff still back then. But one of the things that stands out in my mind is that the story about Granddaddy going back to the liquor still, and he had the sixth sense about when they were coming to bust his liquor still, and they would do it and bust his liquor still and shut it down and tear it up and everything, but they could never catch him there. They might find the still, but they could never find him. And they knew that he ran a still, but it became so frustrating with them that they could not catch him. And I heard this one story about he was back there with this liquor still, and the police just knew they had him. They knew they had him. They had him, surrounded. They were getting ready to bust him. And they came rushing in, and the story was he took off running. And they chased after him through those woods trying to catch him. And they said he was so fast that he got all the way back to his house, changed out of his clothes, put on a painter's uniform, climbed up on the side of the house on a ladder and act like he had been painting. And the police finally got there, and they were out of breath, and they were looking at him, and they said, Coleman, boy, we know you were back there. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been sitting here all day painting my house. I don't know what y'all talking about. And the story goes that the cops they just had to start laughing because they couldn't do anything. They couldn't prove he was there. And one of the police officers who, from what I was told, ended up becoming really good friends, or not friends, but they got on good terms as the years went on, was a white police officer who he just started laughing. He said, "You know what, Coleman, you are one fast nigger." And they all just started laughing. And my grandfather just, all he could do was laugh and continue to act like he was painting. And when my family relayed that story, everybody just fell out laughing. That was a different time, and the N word was used back then. But they just, it was just a funny story about my grandfather, and why it resonated with me was the fact that it was just a side of my grandfather I didn't know existed. Another story, and then I'll move on from him, was a story my great-grandmother Mae told about my grandfather. Now, my mother and my grandfather always bumped heads. Always. They, I think some of it was they were so much alike. But as my mom got older, their relationship got better. But one of the stories that my great-grandmother told, that my grandfather swore was a lie, but she told it anyway. She told a story about my grandfather beating my mom. Now, back then, beating kids, was acceptable. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but that's how it was. They would get beatings with belts. And my grandfather was a strict disciplinarian. But my mom was stubborn, and she wouldn't back down. And whereas the other kids, would back down and not tend to get him a lot of lip. My mom was going to say what she had to say regardless. So they talked about this one story where something happened between them, and my grandfather hit my mom and knocked her down, and she would jump back up, and he'd knock her down again, and she'd jump back up, and the rest of the kids were telling her, you know, Alice, stay down, Alice, stay down. But she wasn't going to stay down. She was going to jump back up, and he was telling her, you know, you better stay, sit your behind down and stay down. And so they went back and forth, and finally my grandfather hit her and knocked her down, and she jumped back up, and he said to her, you know, I tell you one thing, as long as you in my house, you're going to do what I say, and that's that. And you're not going to sass me or, you know, jump up at me. And so my great grandmother said that my mom turned and walked out of the house into the front yard and stood in the middle of the front yard and yelled at him, you know, okay, I'm not in your house, old man. Come on out here and I'll fight you like a man. And they said my grandfather refused to come out that house. And and when she was telling this story, my grandfather got so upset. He started, you know, talking real fast like he would do when he would get agitated, and he was calling her liars and, you know, Mae Ford, you know you lying, you know you lying. And his mouth got to running so fast that his false teeth went flying out his mouth across the yard and landing. And everybody just turned and looked at the teeth, and everybody just fell out laughing. And he had to laugh himself. But, you know, yeah, that was just one story, you know, another story about my grandfather that kind of stands out with me. But anyway, so that was Grandpa Howard. Now, my grandma Jessie, she was also an interesting character. She liked to get people riled up, and my mom was one of them. You know, and I think that's also where my mom got that trait from, teasing people and getting them all riled up and things like that. But the thing I remember most about Grandma Jessie and I loved about her was I loved just spending time with her one-on-one. And it wasn't that we did anything spectacular. I mean, a lot of the times it was her going fishing, really. And she loved to fish. She would sit out at her fish holes at Lake Waccamaw and other places. Sometimes she just stop on the side of the road and fish. And I loved, you know, spending time with her like that. And you know, and I can't remember any particular pearls of wisdom that she provided to me directly, but for me, it was just that one-on-one time with her, you know, whether it was going shopping or, you know, just taking a ride to go see someone. When I was real young, she used to work at this place called Bertha's, which was this diner in town. And sometimes I would go to work with her, um, you know, and just sit there all day while she worked at Bertha's. And, you know, for me, those were the special moments with Grandma Jessie and just watching her interact with different people. Um, yeah, that's really all I can say about Grandma Jessie. I just love those times with her and going places with her and just being in her presence. And And the thing about both my grandparents, they were well respected in Whiteville. I remember when my grandfather passed away, you know, the big turnout for his funeral. And there was a big turnout for my grandmother's funeral as well. But those are the things that I remember about my grandparents. Now, my mother was a whole different animal. My mother and if you met my mother, you would wonder how I could be her child. Picture a, I don't, if you don't have never heard of the Jeffersons, I would suggest you go back and look up the Jeffersons. Um, there was a George Jefferson who was just a character. He was like a black um, racist black guy who was just hilarious, and if you could get past some of his issues, he had a good heart. And he had a maid named Florence who was a smart mouth woman who they would battle back and forth with their words. But for those of you who see this video who do not know them, look back through the history and find out about the Jeffersons. But my mother was like a female George Jefferson, with a little bit of Florence sprinkled in. And I think that's a good description of my mother. My mother didn't hold back. She said what came to her mind. I used to call her an equal opportunity bigot because she had something negative to say about every race on the planet. But the weird thing about that is she meant no harm with that. I mean, it was just like something maybe that came from her generation and her experiences that made her that way. Which was funny because one of her, and when I say she didn't mean any harm, was a few of her good friends, I mean, the people she was closest to, even though she might say those things that she said, which weren't acceptable or politically correct, and probably would have, if she was a star, she probably would lose all her fame and money from some of the things she said. But some of her closest friends were of a different race. She loved them to death and they loved her. But my mom, she wasn't a very affectionate woman. She didn't show her emotions a lot or talk about her emotions a lot, but she was giving. She would do anything for anybody. You might have to hear about it, but she would do that. And for her kids, she would do anything for us. She would, like I said, she might give us mouth about it, but she wasn't going to see us do without. And she, that was just her. And she was a hard worker. Again, her and her siblings got that from her parents. That was just in her. She was going to do what she needed to do to take care of her kids. And her kids were me and my sister Ramona. And, we may have moved a lot growing up because she had to do what she had to do being a single parent to take care of us. I mean, we were, latchkey kids. I had a key to our apartment at 6 years old, and sometimes would be home by myself because my mom was working, trying to make ends meet. But again, like I said, that was just, my mother did what she had to do. Now, like I said, my mom was a mess. She didn't hold back. She said what, came to her mind, and people didn't mess with her. One of the earliest memories I have of my mother was we used to live in this side of town called the West Side, and the West Side was not the best area, and it was predominantly black and Hispanic, and nobody messed with my mom's kids. That was just it. You knew if it was Alice Smith's kids, you did not mess with them because she had a reputation like that. I remember being a young age and my mother would be outside in the street fighting. That was just, if somebody messed with her kids, that's what she was going to do. If she didn't like something somebody said, that was her. And the funny thing is, my sister is a lot like how she used to be, a lot like how my mother used to be. I remember growing up, and I remember one time my mom and my sister were out in the neighborhood, and they're, arguing and about to fight these people down the street, and I'm sitting there crying, begging them to stop. Please stop. I always felt like I was the only voice of reason between the three of us. But that was just my mom, and that was, just how things went with her when I was young. It wasn't the best experience, but it was just her. I would get so embarrassed. I would be mortified about my mom's behavior sometimes. But, that was my mom. I loved her. and that was pretty much her. And she was that way until she died. She didn't hold back. She shot from the hip. She said what she had to say, and she did things her way, and that was just her. She was going to give you her opinion whether you wanted to hear it or not. But my mom, and a lot of the things I learned from my mom, I learned from the mistakes she made, and I learned from, you know, observing her. You know, there was things, positive things that I picked up from her, like, you know, you get out and you work for you what you want. Nobody, you know, don't expect anyone to give you anything, and don't depend on anybody to give you anything. You get out there and you do what you need to do, and you take care of your family. And other things, like I said, about how she interfaces with people, and some of the things she said, and the things she did that were not positive, that I learned that I don't want to, you know, emulate those things. And um, I think the thing I really want to say about that is that what I want my descendants and what I want my kids to know is that, you know, parents aren't perfect, and they make mistakes, and a lot of the way they raise kids and the things they do, um, especially the previous generations, were based on how they were raised. And it doesn't make it right. It doesn't, you know, sometimes it doesn't make it wrong, but that's just how they handled things. Um, my mom, like I said, my mom was who she was. And I hope, you know, she wasn't a perfect person. She had her issues. And I think each of us do. And I think what we can hope from our kids is that they learn from our mistakes and they're better people than what we were. At least I hope that for my kids, is that they've learned from me, not just the good things, but the bad things too. You know, I make mistakes. And one thing, you know, my mom was not a person to say I'm sorry. And she was not a person to say I love you. I think the first time I heard my mom say I love you to me, I was 18 and going into the military. Um, she may have said it before that, but that's the earliest memory I have of it. So I make a point of saying I love you to my kids. And, you know, I hope they say it even more to their kids. I, you know, I hope I say I'm sorry. You know, my mom was not one to say she was sorry, even when she made mistakes. My mom was hard on both me and my sister. Yeah, I think my sister got the brunt of a lot of things because they were so much alike, and my sister didn't hold back, where I tended to be very reserved, very quiet, and I held back and I didn't challenge my mom. So my sister tended to bump heads with my mom a lot more. But I think we both sought the approval of my mother, and we wanted to hear those words of I love you, and those hugs and things like that. So it was a difficult thing that we didn't get that from her. And you know, I think I can't speak for my sister. She would have to speak for herself. But for me, that drove a lot of my behavior, in the sense that I felt that I needed to do things right. And if I did certain things a certain way, I would get that approval from my mom. But to be honest, it never really came to me directly. I learned from family and friends that, you know, she talked a lot about me and my accomplishments, and the things I did well. For me, it would have meant a lot more to hear it from her directly, but it helped in the end to know that she saw me in that light. But again, that was just her. That was how she lived her life, and you know, I have to respect that because she was my mother. But what I hope that you guys get, and I hope my kids get and pass on to their kids, is that when you have kids and loved ones, you show them that you love them. You tell them that you love them. You, even when you're mad at them, you let them know that, you know, that you still love them. You never make them feel that your love is conditional. You let them know that, you know, you will be there, and you will love them even when they do mess up. And again, you know, you let them know that you aren't perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things they don't like. But have that dialogue with them where, you know, if your child is feeling frustrated or angry or feeling unloved, or they are, you know, or they have challenges and things happen to them, that they can come to you and talk to you about them, and you're going to be there for them regardless. And you know, I didn't have that with my mother. I wish I had. I hope my children feel that they have that with me. It may be difficult, but I hope that they do feel that. And I hope they pass that on to their children, and their children feel even more comfortable with coming to them and knowing they can talk to them about anything. Um, so, you know, that's my pearls of wisdom to you with regards to, um, you know, interfacing with your kids and your loved ones. Um, my other thing is that I wish, you know, I wish that you make memories with your kids. I mean, memories that they look back on and they can smile and take with them, and they can own. My mother wasn't big on things like that, but the one thing, you know, the couple of things she did pass on to me was her love for, you know, Christmas and Thanksgiving. And she had certain rituals that she would do during those times of the year. And I, you know, created those with my kids, you know, decorating the tree and playing Christmas carols and things like that. So, you know, it's important to make memories with your children that they can take with them throughout their life and hold on to and cherish. And I encourage you to do that. You know, I think with my kids, I made up my own special songs for them when they were babies, and I would sing them to them and dance around with them as they got older until they were too big to do it. And I hope that when they have their own children, that they make similar memories. You know, I hope they can look back on with fondness about how my mom used to put me on her feet, and, you know, well, this is them saying that, of course. You know, my mom used to put me on her feet and dance around and sing my special song directly to me. And that's what I want for them. And I encourage you to make those memories with your children as well. So, you know, those are the important things, I think. Like I said, you know, you let the people know who are important in your life know how you feel about them, and that they're valued, and you have unconditional love for them. And I think that's, with your children, that's the most important thing. Now, when it comes to me and my mother, you know, we finally came to terms with it, and I'm glad. It brought me closure and peace, when we did come to terms with our relationship, right before she passed away of pancreatic cancer. You know, I spent a lot of time with her, and, you know, just being there and trying to help her as much as I could. And it was a couple of days before she passed away. And I remember she was sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, and I was standing there brushing her hair. And she was real quiet, and we really weren't saying anything to each other. And I happened to look, you know, look to the side at her face, and I saw tears coming down her face. And I didn't say anything because I can count maybe on 2 or 3 fingers the number of times I saw my mom cry throughout my life. But this was one of the times that she cried, and it was a quiet cry. She wasn't making any noise. She was just sitting there, and her tears were running down her face. And she said, you know, I brushed her hair and she cried, and we just stood there for a while, and I was too scared to say anything because I didn't really know what the tears were about. And she said to me, I just want to thank you for being a great daughter. And for me, that was the first time she had ever said anything like that to me. And I initially didn't know what to say because I really, you know, didn't know that she saw me like that. And it saddens me that it took her dying, in her dying days, for me to find out how she saw me. It meant the world to me that she said it. But I wish we could have had that type of relationship when she was full of life and we had years to spend together. So, you know, it just floored me. It really did. Like I said, my mom didn't talk about her feelings or anything like that. And the only thing I could say to her was, well, thank you for being a good mother. And we both stood there and we cried. You know, we didn't hug. That wasn't my mom. We just stood there and cried, and I continued to brush her hair. And that was one of the last memories I have of my mother. And one thing I want to say to you guys is, don't wait to the end of someone's life or the end of your life to tell them how you feel about them. Don't do it. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you. So on that note, I think I'm going to end this video. It's like 37 minutes, and I'm sorry because I didn't intend for it to last this long. But again, you know, tell the people you like in your life you value them, whether it's your significant other, friends. Don't wait until the end of their life or the end of yours and leave this world with regrets. And tell it to them when you both can enjoy it and appreciate it. And learn from your mistakes and learn from the mistakes of others more than anything. Not just yours, but from the mistakes of others. So you don't have to make those same mistakes. And that is it for this video. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I hope you get something out of it. And that's it. Okay? So I'll wait a while before I figure out what I'm going to talk about on blog number 4. And you guys take care. Love you. Bye.